In this exploration of waking up to divisiveness, on Monday we worked with our own personal experience of divisiveness. We explored what divisiveness felt like inside ourselves, what it was like for us to be in the thick of divisiveness. And then on Wednesday, we explored how separateness is an illusion, and that the reality is connecting and belonging, whether we're looking at it through the lens of ancient wisdom or we're looking at it through the lens of 20th and 21st century science. And we all have our own experience these days, front and center with COVID-19, that really validates how we're all connected. So today, given what we've explored so far, especially how separateness is an illusion and connecting is real, I want to explore belonging to all of life. So what does this mean, and why does it matter? When we say all of life, we're referring to every living thing on this planet, whether it's plant or animal or human. And we're referring to the planet itself. One of the ways to think about separateness, that when we get locked into this place of seeing ourselves and seeing others as separate, we're much more inclined to be willing to exploit whatever else there is, what we see as separate, to see it as a means to an end rather than as an end in and of itself, deserving of dignity and respect. I doubt that any of this group has ever set out to intentionally exploit another living being. And I suspect that we've all fallen into that at one time or another, through lack of awareness, through ignorance, through not knowing. It just happens. When we see others, other life, the planet, as separate, that's an indicator of the separateness we feel internally, of the way and the extent to which separateness, divisiveness, show up in us. And it's there in each of us. We've worked with the 4 conditions of being human that are beyond our control. And each of them, in its own way, provokes separateness in us. So it's there. And yet on Wednesday, when we heard from almost everybody in this group, people talked very easily and readily about the important personal benefits of feeling connected, of belonging. And everybody talked about the pain and discomfort of not belonging. So cultivating belonging to all of life, how do we go about doing that? I want to continue with this framework of our inherent enoughness. These 5 aspects of being human that give us the capacities, the innate, inherent capacities to live a full and meaningful life. The energies that protect us, our inclination to connect and belong, our capacity for self-regulation, our capacity for learning, and awareness. And so for cultivating belonging to all of life, we begin with awareness. This simple realizing when we are feeling separate or when we are feeling connected. We all know what each of those experiences is. What we want to do is bring a heightened, increased, enhanced level of awareness to when either of those experiences is happening. And as we've each been learning in our experience in mindfulness practice, when we bring greater awareness to what is happening, then our thoughts, our spoken words, and our actions begin to shift. Our understanding begins to shift. The awareness itself is necessary and sufficient. In these aspects of being human, it's not about fixing. It's not about getting under control. It's about cultivating the awareness and the understanding and being willing to be with it. And with awareness comes a sense of space. And in that space, we've learned, is where we can choose. It's where our freedom is. It's where we are able to discern between choices that are likely to be unskillful and harmful to ourselves and others, and choices that will be skillful and beneficial to others and ourselves. In particular, in this area of belonging to all of life, I want to talk a little bit about discernment. About 10 years ago, when Kay and I were participating in our teacher training, we met a woman who at that time was in her early 30s. Her name is Louisa. And she grew up with two brothers. And unfortunately, one of them was killed in Afghanistan. And she was still deeply mourning the loss of that brother. She had really not begun to come to grips with that loss. She also had a second brother who, in her words, was very inappropriately abusive to her when she was young. And she'd lived most of her adult life, since her early to mid-20s, at some distance from him. And he had recently requested an opportunity to see her and reconnect. And so she honored that request and spent some time with him. And she learned in that interaction with him that she was not ready to get past the abuse. And she still felt vulnerable to the abuse. She still felt as if it could happen again. And so her choice, as she explained it, was to continue to distance herself from him. Fortunately, he lives on the West Coast, so that part came fairly easily. But here's what she said that really got my attention. And this is at the age of only 32 or 33. She said, I may be choosing to distance myself from him, but I will always hold a place in my heart for him. That's belonging to all of life, with discernment. I have a series of questions that I'd like to pose to you for your reflection. I want to remind you that I've got the recorder going, and you might find it of more benefit to sit with the questions and just absorb them than worry about writing them down. You can always go back and track them later if you need to. These are questions about the differences for each of us in our lives between feeling separate and feeling connected. how we interact with life in our thoughts, our spoken words, and actions is how our degree of separateness and connecting manifest. So to what extent are our thoughts, spoken words, and actions compromised, more likely to be less skillful, likely to be more harmful when we are caught up in grasping, fear, and delusion? That is, when we are feeling separateness internally, when we are influenced by divisiveness. What role does separateness and divisiveness and grasping and fear and delusion play in how we show up? On Wednesday, Mike Groh very thoughtfully and caringly shared with us a story about a close friends, and their infant child who was undergoing heart surgery. And as he was speaking, I was looking at all of the different faces of each of us. And it was very clear that many of us, probably all of us, were deeply touched by that story. We could feel the vulnerability. We felt connected to the vulnerability of an infant in that situation. And perhaps if you have had your own personal experience with a newborn's health struggles, you probably were more likely to have recalled Mike's request to send energy and thoughtfulness several times during the day. The more touched we are, the more connected we are, the more responsive we are. When we belong, when we're connected, we're more likely to feel touched, both by suffering and by joy. Next question. What role did the video of George Floyd's being held down at the neck play in connecting whites to police brutality of blacks versus, for instance, simply seeing a black athlete take a knee during the national anthem? For centuries, gays have been denied basic human and civil rights and abused. What role did many people discovering that a loved one was gay play in changing laws and attitudes? Feeling connected. I'm connected to this person, and I've just discovered this person whom I think is okay, is gay. How does our inclination towards separateness, even though separateness is an illusion, versus feeling connected, which is the reality, influence our attitudes about people being put in concentration camps, or about the deaths of the aged from COVID-19, or about our own inclination to demonize those we see as different from ourselves, such as white supremacists, terrorists, certain politicians, certain religious beliefs? And finally, what role has our sense of separateness played in our indifference over the last 150 years in how we have treated our planet Earth? Some assert that we've treated it largely as a gasoline station and trash dump. When we feel connected, our hearts are much more likely to be touched, either by another's suffering or another's joy. Let's do a practice. Perhaps especially important in this moment, after all these words, to take a couple of deep breaths, soften the belly, and allowing our lungs to fill from the bottom up, all the way to the top. And holding that fullness in our lungs, holding that breath for a moment and another moment, and then letting it go very slowly, very slowly. And one more time. Soft belly, filling the lungs, all the way to the shoulders. And letting go, oh so slowly. And allowing this sense of softening and release to be present throughout ourselves. Dropping the shoulders just a little bit. Softening throughout the face and neck. And as we've returned to our regular breathing cycle, holding our attention on the breathing process and how our breathing shows up in our bodies on the in-breath and perhaps a little differently on the out-breath. Continuing to allow our breathing to settle us, to quiet us. And if we're still feeling a little stirred up, then bring just a little bit more skillful effort to focusing on the breathing, especially on the in-breath and releasing on the out-breath. And now recalling one of the questions I posed just before we started our practice, perhaps the one that you found most unsettling. And noticing what thoughts are arising. What emotions are present? What sensations are present? Whatever is present is okay. We're observers. We're in open, non-judgmental awareness. And we are staying connected to ourselves in the sense that we're taking care of ourselves. Taking care of ourselves as we're feeling unsettled. And having spent a few moments observing our thoughts, emotions, and sensations, we might investigate them a little bit. To what extent are the specific thoughts or emotions or sensations arising in you coming from a place of separateness? To what extent from a place of connectedness and belonging? Being discerning in noticing what all is happening. Staying with, investigating just a little bit more, becoming more familiar with how separateness and connectedness are experienced. Relating to yourself with some kindness. Whatever is present is okay. Continuing our investigation by inquiring, what am I learning about how separateness and connectedness show up in my life? What am I learning? staying in awareness mode, staying connected, continuing to be kind as we take in these learnings, this understanding, this non-judgmental discernment. And one more inquiry. What intentions are forming in you about how you prefer to show up? What intentions are forming about how you prefer to show up in your life? And letting go of all of this awareness and processing, coming back to our breathing. Simply noticing the experience of the in-breath and noticing the experience of the out-breath.